Alright, so today's question is, what do you think of Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate? Okay, so Pinker's The Blank Slate is a challenging read because it challenges conventional thinking, which is uncomfortable for all of us. I'm going to talk about this book in terms of 3 points. Okay, point 1 is what Pinker argues. Point 2 is why he thinks we're so scared of this idea. And point 3 is what he thinks is the optimistic case for this. So let's dive right in. Point 1. What does Pinker argue? He argues that there are 3 dogmas, or beliefs, that have been accepted as true. Self-evident truths for centuries, and that they're wrong. Let's look at those dogmas. So the first dogma is that we're born as blank slates. We enter this life as a void, as an empty vessel waiting to be filled with experiences which then shape our behavior. The second dogma is called the noble savage. It's the idea that humans are naturally good, noble, peaceful, harmonious beings, and that it's only when we live in society that we become corrupted, and we develop things like greed and selfishness. And the third dogma is the ghost in the machine. It's the idea that there's a non-physical mind that is somehow separate from our physical body, that it's immaterial and it animates the body. Now, Pinker argues that each of these dogmas have been proven false through modern scientific discoveries. In neuroscience, for example, we now know that our emotions are physical, that they're based in our body, that they involve neurotransmitters and brain scans. And in genetics, twin studies show that our personality traits are 50% heritable, meaning that genes play a massive role in who we are. And in evolutionary psychology, we see that tribal violence and war predate modern society, so we can't blame everything that's bad about us on society. Pinker is arguing that these 3 ideas have been around for a long time, and they've been very powerful ideas that have affected how we behave as a society. But they're no longer tenable. They're no longer sustainable in light of modern scientific knowledge. Okay, point 2. Why is it that we're so scared of this idea? According to Pinker, there are 2 reasons why we find it terrifying. The first reason is that if our nature is fixed, then we can't improve it. If we're born this way, then we're stuck this way. That means that we can't solve problems like poverty or racism or sexism. If these things are in our DNA, then they'll always exist in some form or another. And the second reason why this is scary, according to Pinker, is that if we're born with certain behaviors and traits, then maybe some groups are superior to other groups. Maybe some genders are better than others. Maybe some races are more evolved than others. And if we think that some people are innately better than others, then we risk justifying inequality and discrimination and oppression. In other words, if we discover that human nature is real, then we might conclude that human nurture is necessary to make sure that we treat each other equally. Okay, let's move to point 3. Why does Pinker think this isn't a reason to despair? So Pinker says that accepting human nature is actually the most optimistic thing we could do, because it allows us to focus on the things that we can change. If we think that everything is determined by our biology, then we woe and try to address problems like poverty or racism, because we'll just assume it's hopeless. But if we accept that we have a nature, then we realize that there's also room for nurture. We can actually do something about these issues. Secondly, Pinker says that accepting human nature helps us to be more precise in our language. When we say that there's a gender pay gap, for example, are we talking about a biological difference between men and women? Or is it something that's socially constructed? Well, if we think that gender is just a social construct, and that it doesn't have any basis in reality, then we might think that the only reason for the pay gap is sexism. So in that case, the solution would be to eliminate sexism. But if we think that there are biological differences between men and women, then maybe the solution isn't to eliminate sexism. Maybe it's to figure out what the biological differences are and then design solutions that work for both men and women. Or consider the statement, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's a popular idea that men and women are fundamentally different. But if we think that we're just born with different brains, then maybe we can start to learn how to communicate across these differences instead of seeing them as a barrier. Basically, Pinker's argument is that when we think of ourselves as blank slates, we end up creating a false dichotomy between nature and nurture. But if we recognize that we have a nature, then we free up space for nurture. Then we can start to tackle the problems that exist in the world instead of blaming our biology for everything that's wrong with society. Okay, so overall, what do I think of this book? Well, first off, it's a really great read. Pinker is a beautiful writer. He writes in a clear, concise style that's engaging and entertaining. It's a quick read. I read it in less than 2 days. But the issue with this book, the issue with this argument, is that it feels incomplete. And here's why. One of the things that Pinker fails to address is that it's not an either-or situation. It's not a blank slate versus human nature. It's possible that both are true. It's possible that we are born with certain predispositions, but that these predispositions manifest themselves in different ways depending on the environment that we grow up in. Consider a tree. Trees are biologically programmed to grow towards the sun. It's in their nature to grow towards the sun. But how tall the tree grows, what kind of wood it has, whether it survives droughts and diseases, all of that is determined by the environment that the tree grows up in. So it's both the tree's nature and its nurture that determine how the tree ends up manifesting. So here's what I think. I think that we are born with certain predispositions, but the way that those predispositions manifest themselves is determined by our environment. So, to go back to the gender pay gap example that I used earlier, it's likely both the case that men and women are biologically different and that sexism exists in society. Both of these things can be true, and in fact, they probably both are true. And only by acknowledging both of these realities can we start to make progress on solving the problem. But that's just my take. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. We often think of our childhood as this formative period where we're shaped by our environment. But the truth is that our whole lives are shaped by our environment. Every experience, every interaction, every relationship, it all shapes who we are. So if you think of yourself as a blank slate, then every experience that you've ever had has shaped you in some way. If you think of yourself as having a human nature, then every experience that you've ever had has shaped how that nature manifests itself. Either way, it's not an either-or situation. It's both. You're both a product of your environment and a shaper of your environment. You're both the blank slate and the human nature. Okay, so that's it for today's video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing. Also, if you'd like to support the channel directly, consider becoming a patron. The link is in the description below. And finally, if you want to watch more videos like this one, you can do so here. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.